This might be a great time because you alluded to it several times talking about the adult birds and being conditioned. And one of the things we wanted to talk about before we lead into some of these other topics is age ratio discussion. Yeah. That's a big deal.
It is, and Larry touched on that a little bit when we talked about the hunting season setting process, yeah, recruitment and the fall flight and all that. And for those that may not have heard that discussion, every year a select sample of hunters are requested to save wings off of birds that they shoot that year. And maybe some of the audience has been part of that sample. And so they send you little envelopes and you take a wing off the bird that you shot that day and you put it in an envelope and then you send it in. And then at the end of the hunting season, there's a what we call wing bee. And so all the ducks that get shot in the Mississippi flyway, they're all sent to, I think it used to be Southern Illinois.
Still Southern Illinois for the Mississippi flyway.
And so a lot of the states send representatives, maybe you all have done it, I'm not sure, you go to the wing bee and you sit there for a couple of days and you go through 30,000 wings. and you, from the wing you can tell not only the species of the duck, but you can tell the sex of the duck and you can also tell the age of the duck. Which is why part of the regulations when you shoot a bird and you transport it, you have to leave either a feathered wing or a head on, because that way with a wing you can tell who it is, how old it is, and what sex it is. So then that data is all compiled and we calculate an age ratio, meaning the number of young per adult that get harvested that particular year. And some of that is adjusted for vulnerability because we know that the young are more vulnerable than adults, and so then you factor that vulnerability calculation into it. And we have a rough index of recruitment. It's a trend, but it's an index like you talked about with the surveys. It's a trend of how many young were produced that year. And we do that state by state. So understandably, if you looked at the sample from Minnesota or North Dakota or from Canada for that matter, there's going to be a lot more young being harvested because it's close to breeding grounds, they haven't been shot at yet, they get first crack at them and so forth. In contrast, if you go down to Louisiana and you take the sample, there's actually going to be fewer young down in Louisiana harvested than there were up in Minnesota. But anywhere there's a weighting factor and we get a whole flyway wide average, so we calculate this age ratio. Some of that data have been dissected and looked at in various ways, but interestingly now we're starting to mine that data set even more about has that changed over time. In other words, if the age ratio in North Dakota was always, and I'm going to make these numbers up, but they're fairly close. If the age ratio was always about 2.5 to 3 young per adult, so say four ducks are shot in North Dakota, 4 female mallards are shot in North Dakota, 3 of them are going to be young and 1's going to be an adult, so it's a 3-to-1 ratio. Okay. If that's what has been kind of the traditional age ratio in North Dakota, well, if all of a sudden something changes in that, and now all of a sudden it jumps up to 5-to-1 or 6-to-1, or conversely goes down to 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, that's one of the data sets we look at to say, whoa, what's changed? What has caused that difference in the number of young we're shooting by area, by location, by year? The by year is partly a matter of production. If we had a lot of ducks produced that year, well then we hope we're going to kill more young. And for the hunters listening and watching, you all like to see years when there's a lot of young ducks. Because they're kind of dumb, Jim.
My favorite kind.
I mean, you're a good duck caller, so it probably doesn't matter, but maybe,
Yeah, it does.
maybe it can be in cases it may matter. You know, our calls may not be as attractive to an old adult hen where the young one's going, oh boy, let's go see what's going on. But anyway, that's a whole interesting data set that we're looking at now to see if there's some trends in the age ratio of the harvest by areas of the country. Cut to the point, the answer is yes. We have seen a change in the number of young birds, mallards. I'm going to speak to mallards here primarily for just a minute. We have seen a change over time, especially since about 2001, 2002, that the number of young birds being shot, killed, in Canada, Prairie Canada provinces, and in the northern states of the United States has gone up, and the number of young ducks being shot in the far south states has gone down. The states in the middle, like Illinois and Missouri, are kind of a mixed bag, and some years they're higher and some years they're lower. But at the extremes, it's really, really obvious. So we're killing a lot more young ducks in the north than we ever did before, and we're killing a lot less young ducks in the south than we ever did before. Think about that for just a minute in terms of what is available for you to be able to harvest in Louisiana, what's available for me to harvest in Missouri, what's available for Dave to harvest in Alberta. And has that sort of changed over time? More or less biologically, the answer is no. I mean, whatever the production is that year, it is, and the birds are going to fly south. So what's caused that? What's potentially caused this shift of more birds being shot in the north now and less young ducks being shot in the south? Several things going on. Maybe some of it is climate related in terms of the amount of time the birds are staying in the north, because in a warmer year they hang up there longer and more birds get shot. Maybe that's part of it. Habitat, yeah, maybe that's a little bit of it too. All of a sudden we don't have the wetland base, Dave, that we used to have in southern Canada. So now there's more field hunting. People hunting out in the fields, and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, the young birds are shot at a higher proportion in the fields than they are over water. I'm going to get to this later.
Framework extensions as well.
Yes. The young birds are more susceptible to being shot in the field than they are over water. Then the next one is technique or method. Has that changed? Jim's already alluded to this. Are we having, do we have different tools than we did before? We've got different kind of decoys. We've got different kind of calls. We've got different kind of layout lines. We've got all kinds of, motion wing decoys going around. We've got different sort of things that we're using that maybe we're more effective now. And maybe that's part of it. And then has the regulations changed? Is there something that's going on that all of a sudden more young mallards are getting shot in North Dakota because we've changed the regulations for some reason? So that's where we start to dive into those component parts as a biologist, as a scientist, and try and factor that out. I don't know how I'll save some of this for a little bit later on, but the bottom line is in the early 2000s, we started to see some changes. And those changes have bounced around from year to year, in part because of weather. It turns cold up north, birds get moved out a little bit quicker. Maybe North Dakota doesn't shoot as many young ducks that year. If it stays mild and warm, more of them get shot. As we've now changed our techniques, they're more susceptible. We've got more people up there chasing them in the fields. We've got more people using spinning decoys. The bottom line is more of them getting shot. And that's a part of this whole equation in terms of hunter success, satisfaction, number of birds, and so forth. So I'll leave that right there for this particular topic.
And that's something that's has been discussed at the Harvest Management Working Group. This idea of differential vulnerability, that is that juveniles are more likely to be harvested than adults, regardless of reproductive success, which is what the age ratio is trying to estimate. And so there needs to be some adjustment for that differential vulnerability so that the estimates from the wings that we collect are more representative of the population on the ground. And that correction is the differential vulnerability. And for mallards, where we have really good data, that differential vulnerability increased. I don't know how much, but it's about 35% or so. Yeah, increased, and it increased rapidly, and then it's leveled off since then. And when I was discussing this earlier, I was discussing it in the role that it plays in the mallard models within AHM, and that those data hadn't really been incorporated because our current AHM only used data until 2002. That it is now incorporated into the integrated population model. But in all of our sitting around, like groups like this, saying, why did that happen? What happened in that period? And the only thing we come to is framework extensions, because it was in about 2000 to 2002 that there was no longer a cost for the states to hunt later, and the northern states, remember we said framework extension. That means the northern states got to hunt earlier. So now instead of October 1st being the hard deadline, we're hunting sometimes as early as September 21st. And so what you've got is you've got more early hunting days in the northern states, and of course you've got spinning wing decoys that increase the vulnerability of those juvenile birds. All of that's anecdotal, which is against what we were supposed to be talking about here, but it's also rock solid. The timing of that increased chain, that increase in differential vulnerability for mallards, and then leveling out, it all happened at that period of extended frameworks and widespread use of spinning wing decoys.
And we look, like Larry has just said, and we've almost kind of been in a state of denial, almost, that something had changed. And maybe it took a year like last year to kind of wake some people up to look back at that data again, to analyze some of it, like Larry said, that hadn't really been analyzed since 2002. You know, some of the band recovery stuff relative to distribution stopped in 2003. It's never been looked at since. I used the term death cross, and I used that in the presentation at the Mississippi Flyway, but I had it on my mind at the time. And did in fact we have some sort of what I call a death cross in the early 2000s, really from about 2001, 2003, 2004. I don't know. A death cross is a term that's oftentimes used in the stock market, where the long-term average is crossed to the downside. It's a 200-day moving average of a stock, and stock crosses below that, and usually corresponding to that happens, a lot of recession occurs in the stock market and in our economy. And so I don't mean that to be totally analogous, but you know, I just had it on my mind to use that term. So then, like Larry said, you go back into that time frame and you say, what changed? What, if anything, changed? And maybe something changed there, that there was a latent effect, meaning that there was not an immediate change, but a cumulative over time. And then maybe last year we reached, you have to ask this question, did we reach a threshold? Did we finally have enough effect that something major happened? I don't know, but it's worthy of discussion and thought. But like Larry said, going back to that early 2000s, there's about 5 or 6 things that happened at that time with framework changes, coupling of a few other things, and one of the big ones that stands out loud and clear at that time is the use of spinning wing decoys.